GM, everybody, and welcome back to another Cyfrin Podcast. We have some fantastic guests here, very topical as well, talking about events and logging and event indexing. And this is going to be for anybody who has worked with events but doesn't actually really know how they work, or people who do know how events work. They know how events work really well, and they've run into the issue of gathering data and querying data from the blockchain to use in some type of full stack dApp or for data or for whatever. GhostLogs is here to help us out. So from the GhostLogs team, we have Chris and George. How are you two doing today?
Very good, very good. Thanks for having us, Patrick.
Yeah, doing great. Thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for being here. So they're off screen, but I promise you they're real people. We get to meet a little bit before we went live here. So the agenda for today is we're going to ask them a couple questions. Then we're actually going to do a little demo of GhostLogs. So GhostLogs is in beta right now. Is that right, Chris and George? It's in beta right now?
Correct. We're doing a whitelist that's on a rolling basis for GhostLogs.
Okay, great. So we're going to get to see a little bit of alpha by going through the beta. So we'll ask some questions, go through the beta, and then we will finish off with asking some questions as well. So people who are going to be listening to this, if you want to see the demo, be sure to jump over to YouTube to go check out the demo. But before we do any demo stuff, let's learn more about GhostLogs. So, who are you guys? What is GhostLogs? Who are you guys and what is GhostLogs?
Yeah, I can briefly introduce myself. So my name is Chris. I'm a co-founder of GhostLogs, and I'm actually a psychologist that turned software engineer. I work at companies like Amazon Web Services and various startups before jumping to crypto, where I was actually working with George on NEV related work. And started off on Binance Smart Chain and decided to build product. And I will let George touch base on what product that we've built since 3.5 years ago, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Chris. Like a little bit about myself as well. After graduating college, I moved to Japan. Worked in Tokyo for about 10 years at a really big company and then a bunch of really small, tiny startups. Had a lot of fun there. And after a decade in Japan, moved back to the US, where I helped a friend start a company in the Bay Area. So I've worked as a software engineer across the stack, all the way from iOS app development to backend and data infrastructure. So as Chris said, we did some MEV strategies together on chain. And after that, we said, okay, what do we want to do next? So we started building some products in the space. The first one was SnowGenesis, which is an NFT finance aggregator. And while we were building that, we did encounter firsthand the difficulties of on-chain events. And what if they're not there or they're not in the format that you like as a consumer of those events? We thought, what if there was a better way? So leaning back into when we were doing MEV, we had access to, everybody knows about state overrides. If you've done MEV, it's kind of a way to say, okay, what if I want to rerun or want to execute this transaction? Maybe it hasn't been run off chain, maybe it has, but with new bytecode or change to an account balance, and then see what would happen if that were the case. So what if you could kind of take that and then productize it and build it and make it super robust, and then offer it to people as a way to efficiently backfill and also have an RPC node that does this for you? That's kind of GhostLogs. It's kind of a way to add events to contracts even after they've been deployed. So if you're consuming data from a smart contract, maybe you're creating a public dashboard, or maybe you're building an aggregator like we were doing with SnowGenesis, or if you're doing your own in-house analytics, then you're probably using events that were emitted from the contract to figure out what's going on.
So GhostLogs came out of trying to do MEV?
Not exactly. So it came out of SnowGenesis, which was our kind of data aggregator for NFT finance. And we had in the past done MEV, where we were familiar with kind of these techniques of state override. So we're like, okay, we did this, a year before SnowGenesis. What if we could kind of use that to help build what we're doing now? And then we did it. It worked out very well. And then we're like, okay, maybe this is an even bigger and more interesting problem than SnowGenesis. And we're like, if we're having an issue, we think other people face the same problems. So what if we could make it into a service?
Interesting. But the original application, so that was something I didn't even think about. So you're saying the original application of basically adding custom events to contracts was trying to reproduce some transaction, or almost like the console.log of real transactions. That sounds like that's kind of what GhostLogs is doing, right?
Exactly. The cool thing is like you can make it structured. So events are like very structured because they have a topic. They also have different properties with their types. So it's kind of like a supercharged console.log almost, but in such a way that anybody can add it at any time. You don't have to rely on the deployer to add it to their contract, which is something that's not very possible unless they have like a version 2 and then they want to do an event audit, but it's not very common.
Interesting. So then, so I guess from a high level, right, we're adding custom events. These aren't deployed on chain, right? This is in some server off chain that these custom events are being added to.
Correct. Excuse me. Correct. So you will compile your contracts with your new events, and that's going to generate new bytecode. And we run these in an off-chain context. So right now it's a centralized, it's a hosted service that will eventually will have open source version as well. And what happens is we efficiently run it across all historical transactions for you in the backfilling process. This is very parallelizable, and we also spin up a node that will inject that bytecode into the chain. It's almost like a fork of the chain.
So if I guess we'll see this in the demo, but so if I'm building my smart contract and I'm working with my smart contract, you're saying basically somewhere in my code, let's say I'm like, working with like a basic Foundry project, I add maybe like some comments in there that don't get compiled by Foundry. I hook it into whatever the ghost log looks like. I deploy my ghost log events, and then you have some server running that just listens to that contract, looking to, I'm assuming it does some type of trace. What is it? What's the actual RPC API? It's like debug, call trace, or something like that. It goes through all the transactions and then will emit your events on some dashboard on like the GhostLogs UI. Is that kind of is what I'm assuming it looks like? Is it what it looks like?
I think that's a very high level view. I would say
Okay.
a couple differences are, excuse me. Sorry.
All good.
So yeah, it's not actually a debug trace. Sorry, just a throat issue.
No worries. You want to get some water? It's all good.
Yeah, give me 1 second, please.
Yeah, sure. I think it's some type of trace, right? Like if for anybody here who's listening, who watched, like I did a Fortabot build on my YouTube where we built a Fortabot, and basically every single transaction that was included in a block, you would basically like rip through every single transaction, go through like almost the opcodes of every single transaction, and like look for things to like notify of an alert. It sounds like this would be doing something similar, obviously not for alerting, but for kind of like console.logging or print statementing, or just giving you state data about the chain in a much easier to digest manner. Are you back? You get some water?
Yes, I am back. Thank you.
All right, cool. Yeah, no problem.
So I would say kind of it's similar at a high level from comparing like a debug trace call to some like ghost logs. I think the main difference is in the robustness. If you try to, for example, change bytecode and then rerun it with a debug trace call against a historical state, it may work a lot of the time, but what will happen is because you're running in a new environment and you have new conditions, if you change, for example, the gas limit, you may have changed the gas price to make things actually work because maybe otherwise they would fail. Now, because those conditions have changed, certain contracts, especially MEV contracts, will then look at those conditions and now they will revert. So they were succeeding on mainnet and now reverting in this forked environment. So it's very important for any kind of simulation engine that does off-chain logs to be very aware of this and be able to very efficiently kind of separate what was on-chain and what is off-chain, and then make sure that's running it completely in a way that's not transparent to the original contract. So at a high level, it is similar, but with kind of the added robustness of making sure that you can differentiate. So the user comes into the interface, they can just edit. There's a browser UI, and you can add in new code, and we'll compile it on the back end for you. You can fix any errors, and then it gets deployed into the hosted service.
Very cool. Very cool. And I would imagine that like a V1 would require the contract to already be verified on some block explorer, so you could input like the event emits. But then I'm assuming like if you're a super giga savant, you could also just like find the spot in the opcodes where you say, all right, I want to emit, the top of the stack or something weird like that. Is that maybe I'm getting way too ahead of myself and getting way too deep, but is that something that how does it work? Do I need a verified contract for it to me inject my own custom events?
For this version, you put in a contract that's already been verified on Etherscan or BlastScan or whatever the is, but it's not that difficult for us to say if you can bring your own source code. So basically, you bring any code, we'll compile it as long as you can generate some bytecode from it, then you can run it in this fork.
Cool. Makes a lot of sense. So from my perspective, my initial thoughts are like, okay, this sounds really cool. Indexing events is a huge pain in the ass, right? You can use some type of decentralized solution, something like the graph, where that's something that I taught in that free code. I made a giant free code camp tutorial a couple years ago where you use the graph, did a lot of event indexing, but a lot of people have said, hey, it's kind of a slow solution. It sounds like this would kind of be something like that. I know a lot of people have event indexing solutions that are centralized in some regard. Is this basically kind of a is the main purpose of this as an indexing solution, or almost like indexing plus one? You can index events but also add your custom events. Like it almost sounds like a super indexing solution, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to kind of frame it. So we think of GhostLogs as kind of an input to an indexer in a way that you can supercharge the transaction with more details. So there are two pieces to the puzzle. One is the logs, then they can be on-chain like you mentioned, or they can be a combination of these off-chain events via GhostLogs, and they plug into your indexer. And because of the kind of the issues that you mentioned as well around indexing, we also built our own indexer solution that can benefit from GhostLogs. It's called Ghost Graph. So it's a way to build your indexer all in Solidity. We think of it as kind of rebuilding the indexing stack.
Interesting. So who is this tool more for? Is it for front-end developers? Is it for smart contract developers? Who is going to be the main user of GhostLogs?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit about the use cases. So primarily for Solidity developers who are already familiar with Solidity that wants to not only write their smart contract or do their audit in Solidity, but also allowing them to empower themselves to build their backend indexers. So imagine that one Node.js developer, Node.js has done to front-end developer, allowing them to become a full-stack engineer. And now you can have more, tool on your belt to build your indexer. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, makes a lot of sense. So a bit of a more charged question. Does this replace events?
So we don't think about it as replacing events. The way we think about it is it should be additive. All right, because we initially created it as a way to quote unquote fix contracts to kind of match what we expect as a data consumer. It's a way to kind of retroactively fix things that were on chain. We're not saying, hey, everybody should remove them and then run them only off chain, because that creates all sorts of ecosystem level problems. Although we do predict that there may be some hybrid approaches that evolve. For example, imagine on mainnet, if you have contracts that are very expensive to emit events, then you can have them running off chain. But on L2s, you may have them all on chain. And I think Ambient Finance is one of the first to do this, where their blast contracts have all the events that you need. But on mainnet, on ETH mainnet, they don't have events for like swapping or minting or burning liquidity. I think mainly it was to be gas efficient. But now solutions like what we have, and there are also other solutions, people can now start to say, okay, I'm able to choose which way I want to do. But we're not trying to prescribe or say, hey, you should run everything off chain.
Interesting. Yeah, a few weeks ago on Twitter, there was a bit of a spat between a number of developers and some protocols about, hey, we should move event infrastructure off chain because gas. Because I think it was Hayden Adams from Uniswap tweeted something, and it kind of sparked this massive debate. I think a lot of the decentralization maxes would say, hey, like this absolutely cannot replace emitting events, right? Because if you replace that, then indexing transactions becomes awful, and querying the blockchain, any type of data becomes very, very difficult. On the other side of things, there are some people who say, oh, well, eventually all of our computers will be so powerful that it will be trivial to kind of do like a debug trace of every single transaction that gets confirmed into a block, and then maybe events become less important. But it feels like the consensus at the moment is events are still good, events are still needed. However, there's probably scenarios where it would be great to emit more data, but emitting, obviously, every time you emit data, you're going to use more gas. So this is where, like what you're saying, kind of like a hybrid solution where you are emitting events, plus using something like GhostLogs will be really, really helpful. And then maybe you just, query all the events through something like GhostLogs or something. It sounds like there's a lot of additive benefits that something like GhostLogs can add.
Yeah, we definitely think about it as a way to add and not to remove. And we do think that if people want to move for example, some important events like swaps or transfers. And then it's very important to also have a full open source decentralized ecosystem around it. But right now we're kind of in this interim phase where there are a couple companies working on this problem, and we don't want to enforce. We don't want to suggest that people take these drastic actions. It's kind of a stepwise.
So I kind of want to ask a confrontational question. Feel free to not comment. So part of the Twitter spat that occurred between, it sounded like it was like, Hayden, Shadow.xyz, you guys. How does Ghost Logs compare to Shadow.xyz? And for people who are listening, Shadow.xyz is another platform doing something similar here, right? Doing kind of this custom events, having events being emitted off chain and kind of this off chain centralized infrastructure. How do you guys, is there a comparison to be made between you and Shadow? Or are you guys totally different? How do you guys feel about even being made as a comparison? And thank you for dealing with my more confrontational question here.
No, it's a great question. I mean, first of all, like, we think it's really cool that there are other teams building in the same space and that kind of share the vision of unleashing kind of 10x, 100x more on-chain data, but in a way that's decoupled from gas costs. So we respect their team and their journey. We think one of the ways we differ is that we're building kind of a full indexing stack. So Ghost Logs and Shadow, what they do is they enrich single transactions. But then what if you could also have a very close interaction with an indexer? So we're building a new indexer, Ghost Graph. They combine together to build this full stack. And I think Shadow only has the off-chain events processing, but they really work a lot better together if they're very tightly integrated. So the other piece of the puzzle is to then combine these events, whether they were on or off-chain, in a way that's very natural. So we think that Solidity is a very natural language for combining events. So imagine, instead of building using the graph or other indexers, where you're building in JavaScript, a different language from your on-chain protocols, what if they could all be the same language? So we're kind of focused on this end-to-end indexing stack.
Cool. So from my perspective, I think I get it. Well, Chris, actually, were you about to say something?
No, I was just going to share a sentiment about, Foundry kind of revolutionized testing, right? Now you could write testing in Solidity instead of, using a hard hat, for instance, right, in TypeScript. And it's just more developer friendly. And we think that it's going to not just be, we're not just going to support Solidity, but make Viper. And if you are on Solana, maybe you will use Rust instead. Yeah.
Gotcha. Makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I think from a high level, I think I understand what the goal of Ghost Logs is, right? Having run into problems with emitting events and indexing events and not having enough data and needing to do way more work than I thought I would need to do to query the blockchain. So if anybody here who is watching this live has any questions, feel free to put it into the comments as well. I think for the most part, makes sense. Seems like it could be something that's very useful to the Web3 ecosystem. So my last question before we get into a demo here is, when is general availability? When is beta being removed? When can people go out and play with this?
So for Ghost Graph, it's currently available for anyone who wants to alpha test. And as soon as we fix the bugs that we know about, and also anything that appears during the alpha test phase, we're going to release it general availability. Ghost Logs is going to be kind of an add-on to Ghost Graph. So it's a way to say, hey, I already have an indexer here. I want to plug in some off-chain events that were never available to me before, and I can use the Ghost Logs technology to be additive. So that'll come right after Ghost Graph is released.
Very exciting. Very exciting. Cool. Well, that's all my questions for now. GMGM would love to see what this looks like. So we talked about doing a little demo here. Yeah, would love to do a little bit of walkthrough for a demo. People who are listening to this as a podcast can definitely continue to listen, but I highly recommend going to YouTube and watching this, because this is a little bit of an alpha drop here. So yeah, let's do a demo.
Okay, I am going to share my screen.
Lovely. Once you share screen, I will pop it onto this stage here. Boom, it is on stage. We can see what you're looking at.
Perfect. Yeah, let's get started. So what you see here on our dashboard is all the forks, ghost forks that you have. You can imagine a ghost fork is like a fork of mainnet, and that will house all your modified ghost contracts, right? So here we have the blank fork. We're going to go into it. And
so basically, so this is like Ethereum forked into this Ghost ecosystem. So this is almost like the ghost log Ethereum chain is what this would be, if that makes
Exactly.
sense. Okay,
Mhm.
cool. Nice.
And now you can actually add additional contract, but in this demo, I have already added 3 blend contract. So we're just going to use the latest one here. And here you can add an additional version if you want to. I only have 1 version, so I'm gonna go ahead and jump straight into the code editor.
Whoa, so
Here's
you built a code editor into the ghost log application. So I guess from a product perspective, what are the thoughts? Because from my mind, building a code editor is actually a lot more work than a lot of people think. What are the thoughts on like integrating this with something like a Remix or an Atlas or something like that to make the editing experience easier? Or maybe this is too much of a product roadmap question.
Yeah, definitely. As we get more feedback from the user, we can iterate as we go. But right now, it doesn't seem like there's any complaint about the editor at the moment. So we're kind of just doing something, on our own.
Cool.
Yeah. So here, the reason why I'm choosing a Blend contract, for those who are listening, Blend is a NFT lending protocol. And as you know, we built Snow Genesis, which is NFT lending aggregator. That's why I'm using this as an example. I'm showcasing why GhostLog can be powerful. Here, I'm going to search the repay method. And the reason why I'm choosing this contract is because, as you see in the original Blend contract, it only emit the loan ID as well as a NFT address, and that's kind of it. But there are so much more that you want to understand, such as, what is the debt amount being repaid, what is the amount, rate, etc. So with GhostLog, you can define your custom gasless event. Here, I actually define it in the iBlend SOAP, as you can see here. And then we can go back by using global search, for instance, and go to the emit event.
So these ghost events are highlighted green, which is definitely a nice visual cue to say, hey, this is kind of a ghost log. Why do you think this app didn't omit the rest of this information?
For gas efficiency reason.
Gas efficiency, yeah.
Yeah, we actually wrote a Twitter thread about it on GhostLogs. Awesome. Yeah, so and one of the cool thing about this gasless event and GhostLog is that not only that you can define and emit your custom event, you can create another function, for instance, that codes another contract on the transaction level and to get additional metadata that you need, and then use that to emit your new event. And I'm going to showcase here. After you're happy with your your event, you can compile and save and run your simulation. And sure, on the left-hand side, we show some of the sample transactions. And what you can do is that if you have custom transaction that you kind of want to double check, you can add that transaction hash and then simulate it. As you see that we have ghost repay. And at this point, you might be wondering if it's real. You can actually cross-reference by clicking on the either scan icon and go back to logs, and then you can copy paste and kind of copy paste the collection against the original event. Copy paste, and sure enough, it is. And you can simulate however many transactions that you want before you feel confident enough to run your backfill job. Okay, I'm gonna pause a moment if you have any question before I jump into backfill.
No, I mean this seems really straightforward. If I have a code base, can I import a code base into the GhostLogs UI? Like if there's a contract that I want to add GhostLogs to, can I import that into here?
If it hasn't been deployed yet, we don't support that yet, but I think if there's an ask, we can add that.
But if it has been deployed, so if it's been deployed, how do I import it in? I'm assuming there's just like a button to import a contract address, and boom, it'll pop it into the text editor.
Yeah, if you want to show Chris, we can pop in like, one of the print tech, for example, or any address.
Okay. Let me go back to the dashboard.
Sure.
Let's see. So if I were to do this, for instance, I create a new fork. and say it's
Okay.
base, and then say
Okay.
friend tag, right? And I
Mhm.
can go and search
just
a
add the
contract
contract.
address. And then
Nice.
I'll do
Okay.
like that. That is the
And boom.
experience.
And now you can start adding ghost logs just like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. Oh, that's very nice.
So we actually use it internally, just like review all the contracts. It's kind of nice. Okay, so let me go back to the blend fork and just continue on with our backfill process. So you can think about backfill process as like you're gathering all the modified ghost contract in a fork, and now you replay all historical transactions against those contracts to simulate that all the transactions, and then emitting your ghost logs. And now I can say, okay, I'm going to say blend v2 repay, and I'm going to specify a block range so we don't backfill all the data from the beginning. And I'm going to select ghost repay and then confirm. And then I will create a backfill job, just like that. And while it's running, I can briefly show you that we actually have another capability, which is allowing our user to deploy fork and go. George, you want to take it away?
Sure. Forks are kind of a way to spin up an RPC node that reflects the new contracts you have here. So it's everything that's in mainnet plus these updates. So you can even add view functions that were not there, and you can call it like an RPC node.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
So once that's deployed, you can go to deployment, and then I'm gonna search blend. For the demo purpose, I'm now going to click on this key, but you can imagine that it gives you the RPC URL as well as WebSocket URL that you can subscribe to. And then go back. We're going back to the job where we created that job. At this point, everything has been done. What you can do is you can download a CSV file, or you can directly export your events into data analytical platform like Doom or Flipside.
That was my next question. Yeah. Okay. That's very cool.
So here I can say blend repay, and I'm going to upload to Doom.
So for people who are unfamiliar with Dune, so Dune is a platform that allows you to basically query blockchain data using SQL. So kind of what we're talking about here, getting data from your smart contracts can be a nightmare. And Dune allows you to just write native SQL queries. And it sounds like what you're doing here, you can emit this list of logs, and then boom, I can do a SQL query on my logs and very quickly parse through, tens of thousands of events and just get very specific events based off whatever my SQL query says.
Exactly. Like my table name has just been uploaded, and I can go ahead and run my.
Although they do GraphQL now too, or is it just SQL? I forget.
I believe they do.
They do GraphQL too. Yeah. Cool. But yeah, boom. I mean, right there. That's basically, yeah. So is this the Dune API that they've used to build this, or is this like hooking into the Dune AI? I didn't even know Dune had an API like this.
So Dune API actually allow you to do CSV upload. So what we've done underneath the hook is to generate a CSV file and then using Dune's API to be able to upload to your account. Something that I was missing is that I actually already imported my API key onto my profile. That's something that I didn't show.
Right.
So
I mean that makes sense. So yeah. So
okay.
you're uploading your events data to Dune to be able to do a SQL query on it.
That's right. And then now you can join against their native table and do and share with the world. Yeah, there's
Very
also
cool.
other things that I would like to show you, which is the flip side part that essentially allowing you to do the same thing as Doom, but where you can just copy paste here. You can click on live query, create one query, and then copy paste what we generated for you, and you can just enter. And take a moment, and then there you go, bam. It's the same thing. And you can, for those of you who want to choose Doom, flip side, we don't mind whichever you want. We allow you to do the same thing. Yeah.
Very nice.
Awesome. So that's the demo for GhostLogs. We can chat a little bit more, or we can go into a demo for GhostGraph. Up to you.
Yeah, I would love to see GhostGraph because to me seems really helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm super excited to share GhostGraph. I have been building indexers on GhostGraph for many protocols, so I personally definitely feel the magic. But for this demo, I'm going to walk through it and then have George talk over me.
So GhostGraph right now we're releasing on Blast. So alpha version Blast. We think there's like a lot of interesting new protocols, and they're going to need to build indexers kind of from scratch. So we think it's a pretty cool way to kind of start, and then we're going to expand outwards to other
Smart
chains.
business move. Nice.
So Chris is going to create an index for a protocol called Battlers, and we can kind of see how it works compared to other indexers. So I think this is like the first way to build an indexer all in Solidity. So if we go into here, we see there's essentially 3 steps to building your indexer. First, you kind of define the entities that you want to query. So in the case of Battlers, you probably want to be querying who the users are, their bets, the races, who won. So there's a way to put everything in Solidity. And we have a small modification to the Solidity preprocessor. We build our own kind of preprocessors to the compiler to be able to add relationships, right? Because we think we want to essentially say, hey, the user has multiple bets, a race has multiple bets as well, and you want to be able to reference each other. So when you query in GraphQL, these are set up as in your schema already and ready to be queried. And then later, after we generate the code for the indexer, we'll be able to fill in these items. So next step is, sorry, if you wanted to.
Yeah, just real quick. So this schema.sol is like a hybrid Solidity / GraphQL file.
Exactly. It's completely compatible with Solidity, except it has 2 extra keywords. One is at mini and one is belongs to, just to set up the relationships.
Right. Okay.
It's almost like a TypeScript for JavaScript. You can add extra stuff to it, but it'll still be fully compatible. And in the events, then you go to events and you say, okay, here are the events that I want to listen to. So when, for example, there's a new bet or a new race or something has been finalized, I want to be able to take an action. So at first I import those events. I can either write them by hand in the Solidity interface style, or I can put in the contract address and it'll be fetched for me, and I can just click which ones I care about. The next version will also support GhostLogs. So imagine that if an event wasn't there, now you can add in GhostLogs and they'll be able to very easily be almost like an add-on. It'll be an input to this indexer. So when I'm confident with these events, I'll be able to generate my code. This will essentially create a stub for my indexer. For example, I'll be able to say what addresses I want to listen to, and then what I want to do when the events are emitted. So similar to how other indexers work, when there's a reward distributed event or a race end, I'll have access to that event details, and I can fetch my entities that I defined earlier, and then I can update them and save them.
And for the demoing purpose, I'm just going to copy paste what I already created so that we don't have to see me typing.
Yeah, so here, I think we listen to, reward distributed, race begin and end. And each time, for example, let's say the race end function. This is called by the indexing engine when the race end event is emitted on chain. And then this function will then essentially be a callback, and it'll tell you, okay, what do I want to do when this happens? So I get the user, I get the race, and I update. So in this case, we set the winner and the winner transaction on the race entity. And later, when this runs, I can then query those. So we have this for all the events that we need for this particular index. And I think we can go ahead and compile and deploy. So this is going to backfill all the historical events, and then it's going to give me a GraphQL playground. Okay, it's ready to go. And I can go ahead and query this. So this is kind of a way to kind of explore with your API and make sure that things are functioning as you want. And when it is, you can go ahead and integrate it into your DApp. So that way it kind of helps people, maybe smaller teams that only have maybe 1 or 2 people. Now you have the ability to not just write your contracts, but you can write the indexer all in the same language. You can reuse the same code if you want. So you don't have to have like 2 versions of your math or your logic. So we think it's kind of cool to do it in Solidity. We love Solidity.
Very cool. This seems really, really cool. Is that the end of the demo then?
That's right. I
Cool.
am going to shut it down.
Cool. Yeah, no, this seems really cool. So again, anybody who's taken, I know it's been like a year and a half, 2 years now. Anybody who's taken that JavaScript, that hard hat, full stack course on Free Code Camp that I made, this would basically replace some of the, all the event indexing stuff that we just did, right? And to make it a little bit easier to get into your applications. So I guess following this, a question that I have almost about the future of events, right? Obviously, you guys kind of have at this point, a little bit of a vested interest in some of this off-chain infrastructure kind of becoming the norm, right? A lot of decentralization maxis get really nervous about that, right? Even stuff like account abstraction, right? If we're like, oh, well, for account abstraction to work, we need a lot of off-chain infrastructure to work. And people get very nervous about having the base layer of a chain rely on all of this off-chain infrastructure. How do you see the events game evolving? Do you see it as, and I know I kind of asked this at the beginning a little bit, do you see requiring our chains to rely on so much off-chain infrastructure to be a good thing, a bad thing, just a necessary thing? What do you think about it?
I think it really just depends, right? Like different chains, different ecosystems have different requirements, different constraints, and it's always trade-offs, right? For example, on ETH, because gas is so expensive, it makes a little more sense to move some of the maybe non-critical events if there is a ecosystem built around it, right? Is there a way for someone to very easily not have to trust or rely or have to sign up for a specific walled service? It has to be available to them, and the ecosystem has to be there, right? We don't want to be a point of failure. We don't want to be the one or two companies that people have to rely on. We're just trying to innovate in the tech space and say, okay, it works better when it's centralized for now, just to iterate quickly, but then we have to push it out, and it has to be fully open, transparent, open source, decentralized, in order for people to really build on top of it and rely on it. So we're kind of in this kind of testing, development, interim phase, we think. But in the long run, I think it makes sense for some things to be off chain if they can be very easily verifiable. I think that's the other really important point, verifiability. For example, if we look at, ZK apps, right? A lot of the proving is happening off chain. But then I can very inexpensively verify it on-chain. And this unlocks all sorts of interesting possibilities that before would be too expensive to do fully on-chain. So I think the world may be moving towards a hybrid setup. But again, all the infrastructure and the transparency and the verifiability has to be there. Like we said, we don't want to be we don't want people to have to rely on one or two services that may go down, or they have to trust them. We don't want to be censoring anything here. So we're just kind of trying to develop new tech and try to see what's cool and what makes sense to then open up and open source and decentralize.
I could see the argument too being, hey, the smart contracts themselves are decentralized, right? And that's the thing that matters the most. This is almost like, I don't want to say like syntactic sugar of the UI. I don't even think that makes sense. But this is almost like, hey, this just kind of makes it easier to build front ends, but the back ends are decentralized. So whatever. A lot of people would push back on that as well, saying, hey, well, if the front ends are centralized, then nobody can access them. But I definitely hear what you're saying. And I think definitely something like this will make sense in some scenarios. So, and yeah, I think as of right now, most of the big apps that we work with use some type of centralized indexer or some type of centralized event logging structure in one way or another. I feel like only the really, really minimized apps can get away without using events. Like I'm pretty sure all the most popular DeFi apps have some type of centralized front end, unless you guys have seen it differently.
Yeah, I think the same as you. We've seen mostly centralized here, but like in the future, I do see also people deploying. Say, what if I could deploy my front end to a decentralized storage like IPFS, right? That anybody can read it. It's immutable. And then if you have decentralized indexers, there's already the graph. They have their own decentralized indexer. You can imagine that there's steps towards fully decentralizing the whole stack. And I think a lot of people are thinking about that, and there's a lot of interesting developments there.
Definitely. Cool. Well, I've learned a lot on this call so far. I guess, yeah, I mean, you pretty much hit most of my questions. Let me just look at my notes here if I have any other questions here. Yeah, you pretty much hit most of my questions. This was a great walkthrough, very efficient call here. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, that you like to say, that you want developers or security researchers or really any technical person in the Web3 ecosystem to know?
Yeah, I just have a question in regards to, the things that you have done. You have done a lot of tutorials as well as educational content. From your conversation with the new students as well as, veteran Solidity developers, what do they wish they can do with Solidity? Like, have they ever, expressed any wants or needs?
Yeah, probably out of the scope for this call. I think one of the biggest some of the biggest issues are like stack too deep is really one of the ones that comes up a lot, and that's when you use too many variables. Basically, well, that's kind of oversimplifying the problem, but yeah, essentially use too many variables, and you have to essentially combine your variables into a struct to make things work. Or yeah, some gas optimizations are some of the big ones. I would say those are probably the big two that I hear about a lot. Sorry, if you could solve those, great. But that might be a little bit out of the scope of what you guys are working on.
I hear that. Yeah, definitely ran into those issues myself as well.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Any other questions or anything you want to tell any technical devs in Web3?
For me, it's just continuing innovating. I see a lot of products that can be built using different various technology and always learning on other protocols that's interesting and the ecosystem. I certainly learned a ton by building indexer for multiple protocols. That's kind of like how I learn from building it and doing it, understanding the contract, understanding a protocol by building indexers. Yeah, continuing building, continuing innovating, and learn other protocols and just not, what you are doing, because sometimes you really do need to be inspired.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. Well, where can the people find you?
Yeah, you can find us in multiple ways. The easiest way is probably through Twitter. So you can go to twitter.com and then /0x GhostLogs. And then inside you can have all the information that we need. We have Telegram, and you can message us directly on Twitter.
Cool. All right, everyone, be sure to check out GhostLogs on Twitter. Be sure to look out for general availability of GhostLogs. Happy building. Thank you so much, Chris and George, for walking us through how you're thinking about events, about indexing, about what you're building on GhostLogs. And hope you guys have a great rest of your day and looking forward to general availability.
Awesome. Thanks, Patrick.
All right.
Thanks, Patrick.
Awesome.
Thanks all.
Have a great one. Bye.